Hey, pathologist. All right, welcome to our first video for pathogens and parasites. So this is our video for Unit 1, which is all about immunity and infection. And this is the video for Concept 1. So we're going to take a look at the lymphatic system today, which is the home of the immune system. And we'll talk about that distinction here in a moment. And we just want to go over the anatomy. And anatomy is sort of the shape and location of different structures in the body. Okay, so some exciting things ahead. So by the end of this concept, we're going to have some foundation laid for this course and for what we are going to learn about immunity. So we're going to take a look at the lymphatic system and how it's functionally related to some of the other systems in the body. We're going to discover what lymph is, and we're going to be able to talk about how it's transported through the body. We're going to be able to name what kind of stuff is inside of lymph and what is and where it goes. So how does it get carried to the heart? And what are all of these lymphatic vessels all about? How are they different from blood vessels? We're going to also be able to talk about some of the organs that make up this system. And we've got primary and secondary lymphoid organs. And lymphoid is just the word that we use when we're talking about things in either, or the tissue types that are in either the lymphatic system or the immune system. And you might see those two words as interchangeable whenever you're reading different literature about these systems. You'll see that those words get kind of mixed up a little bit. So we're going to identify some specific things too. So here's a list of all the cool stuff we're going to be able to learn about. And we're also going to know a little bit about what they can do by the end of this video and by the end of the activities that you'll be doing in class as well for Concept 1. All right, so let's get this party started. So just as a reminder that all of our body's systems work together. It's not like one system operates in isolation with another. And the whole goal of bodies working together as a system is to maintain homeostasis. And homeostasis, like we might think of as equilibrium or a balance. But I kind of like to think of it as in terms of keeping a stable environment for all of the different chemical reactions that need to happen in our body that are necessary for survival. And so just to be clear about what we mean when I say a body system, you might have heard of your digestive system or your urinary system or your reproductive system, etc. But really all of those things are just an ensemble of different biological objects. And so these are molecules. They can be just a single molecule, or they can be made up as different cells. Cells of the same type will form together to become tissues. I shouldn't say the same type. Cells that have sort of similar functions are going to come together to be tissues. And then those tissues get organized into organs. And then we become organisms because we're made of multiple organs. Get it? Organism. I was like 40 before I figured that out myself. So anyway, all of those things end up working together to contribute to a particular biological function. And the immune system, I think, is particularly interesting because the immune system has a lot of focus on these first two things. A lot of what the immune system does is actually done at the molecular level or even the cellular level. And we'll get to know a lot more about that in the next video. Okay, so our immune system is a complex network of organs, cells, and proteins. So see like a molecule here that are able to fight off microbes, fight off infection. And the immune system is housed primarily within the lymphatic system of the body. And it's really closely integrated with other body systems, such as our circulatory system and in fact, our nervous system as well, to help maintain homeostasis. And here's just a quick fun fact. Hey, did you know that the immune system keeps a record of every microbe it's ever defeated? Pretty cool. All right, so let's just take a quick tour of the lymphatic system, and then we're going to start looking at things a lot more specifically. So, what's the point? What's the point of the lymphatic system? So, its job is to return fluids that have leaked out of the vascular system, out of our blood vessels, back to the blood. And you're like, what? My blood vessels are leaky? Like, what are you talking about? Well, especially at capillary beds where fluids are being exchanged with the cell surface, there is stuff that ends up on the outside of the cells. And the outside and the inside of cells are both kind of bathed in this fluid. And the lymphatic system's job is to kind of go through that fluid and make sure it's doing okay and to circulate it as needed. So it's also going to pick up things in our digestive tract. So anytime you eat food that has lipids in it, has fat in it, there's a particular type of lymphoid tissue that's going to pick up those lipids and the vitamins that are soluble in lipids, A, D, E, and K, and it's going to transport those around for us as well. We're not going to really talk about this function of the lymphatic system at all in this unit, but I just wanted to lay it down here so that you knew that it was one of the things that it does. But the real big focus for our class is that it's the system that's responsible for initiating an immune response and also undertaking all the surveillance as well. So we've got our sort of main structures, which are going to be the lymphatic vessels, lymph, which is the name for the fluid, and lymph nodes, which we'll get into more detail about what they do later. So if we take a look at this picture over here, we're looking at the red side, and that's oxygenated blood that's leaving the heart and going out to the body, or leaving the heart or entering the heart from the lungs. That's all of our red blood here. The blue side is showing blood that is being returned to the heart from the body after the oxygen's been dropped off at the cells. And remember, every cell in your body is connected to a capillary, right? So every cell in your body has access to the oxygen and nutrients and sugars and other things that are flowing around in your blood. And then it's going to take up the oxygen and drop off CO2, carbon dioxide, which gets returned to the heart and then goes to the lungs, where when we exhale, we get rid of that CO2 and some of the other waste products that are made. And the lungs will bring in more oxygen, and they go back into the heart, and the whole system starts again. Okay, so where does lymph fit in all of this? Well, the thing is like in these capillary beds, both in the lungs and in the body, we've got our lymphatic vessels, and they're kind of intertwined there in the capillary beds. And they're going to be picking up any of that fluid that doesn't make it into the blood vessels or somehow leaks out, and they're going to recycle it and send it all back to the heart. But along the way, and lymph, by the way, is a one-way system. Along the way, the lymph nodes are going to be monitoring that substance and looking out for those invaders before it sends things back to the heart. So whether it's coming from the lungs, which is up here, you have to imagine the lungs, and going back to the heart, it's a one-way system, or if it's coming from the body and going back to the heart, it's a one-way system. And you have lymph nodes along the way that are going to be monitoring what's passing through those lymphatic vessels as we go. All right, so let's take a more specific look then at the anatomy of the lymphatic system. And when I say the anatomy, what I mean is like, what are the structures that are involved? How is it laid out in an organism? And we're going to use humans as our example because I think that's something that we can all relate to, but just appreciate that every vertebrate, so anything with the backbone, has some sort of immune system and some sort of version of a lymphatic system as well. Okay, so I mentioned already that we have those vessels, the lymphatic vessels, lymph and lymph nodes. Let's define those. Okay, so our lymphatic vessels are these kind of drainage canals. They're found all over the body. And if you've ever had swelling, like if you've rolled your ankle and you've noticed that it's become swollen, that's your friend lymph that is causing that swelling, that edema. It's the lymph that the lymphatic vessels have sent there to try to heal your injury, right? And so you've maybe experienced a swollen ankle before, or swollen wrist or something, and in that case you've experienced lymph. And lymph is this protein containing fluid that moves through the lymphatic vessels, and some of those proteins could be part of the immune system, or it can be other proteins that are just moving around the body, and they move through the vessels as their network. And then the lymph nodes we can think of as like filters, right? Like I don't know if you have a fish tank at home, but it probably has a filter on it. The water moves through that filter, and all the impurities are sort of taken out of it. So you can think of the lymph nodes as filters. And so their job is to sort of do the surveillance and monitor that lymph as it goes through the body. And they contain these different immune cells. And we're going to talk more about cells in the next video. But for now, we're going to basically call anything that's an immune cell a lymphocyte. Get it? Lymph. Yeah, you're seeing the pattern here. Okay, so they are going to contain those immune cells, which if they do detect something, they can then release those immune cells into the lymphatic system, get them to the heart, out to the rest of the body quickly. Okay, so then we've also got a few specific organs that are involved with the lymphatic system. So you may have heard about your spleen. Not very many people know what their spleen is all about, but I'm going to tell you. So we'll get to that in a minute. There's also thymus or tonsils, and then there's a bunch of tissues. So tissues aren't necessarily an organ, but they're a group of cells that are all working together to do the same function. And you're going to find that these tissues are spread all over the body. And we're going to look more at those tissues here as we go. All right, so let's first start talking about our lymphatic vessels. Okay, and this is going to look overwhelming at first. Hang with me. We're going to talk about it as an overview. We're going to go into it in detail, and then we'll recap it again too. So here's the thing with lymph. Lymph is only going to flow in one direction, and it's flowing to the heart. So no matter where it is collected in the body, it's going to make its way back to the heart. And we've got these different names for different parts of the vessels. Like, I'm really not too worried that you know about all these names, but it would be remiss of me not to explain them because they're going to come up as we go. And so if you remember from this last photo, oops, sorry, going way back here, we have our blood capillary beds, and we also have our lymphatic capillaries, right? So they are the teeny tiny vessels that are one cell thick, and they're able to collect all those fluids that are leaking from blood vessels and from other cells. And then all of those capillaries collect into these lymphatic vessels. And then the lymphatic vessels travel through the lymph nodes. And then many lymphatic vessels will come together to make a larger one. And they call that a lymphatic trunk. And then finally, as it gets closer and closer to the heart, it splits off into these two ducts. You've got two different ducts here. So you've got your thoracic duct and the other duct. Lymphatic duct, I think, is what it's called. We're only really focused on the thoracic duct because it's kind of the big deal. But the thoracic duct is the one that kind of collects all of the stuff that was delivered through the trunks, and the other trunk is collecting everything that was on the right side of the body. Right side of the body. Okay, so let's take a look at this again. So as a schematic, and I put some awesome animations in here. You guys are going to love it. You ready? Okay, so lymphatic capillaries. Here they are. So those are our lymphatic capillaries here, tied up in these capillary beds, right? Okay, and so they're collecting the lymph, and it is getting collected into these lymphatic vessels, and which are like what we're looking at here. These are the vessels. They're traveling to a lymph node, which are those little filters like on your fish tank. And then that lymph is moving into a lymph trunk. So these vessels get bigger and bigger. So it's as all those vessels feed from a lymph node, they have to get kind of wider in diameter to be able to handle it all. And those trunks then feed into one of two ducts. and those ducts then go directly into the heart. So hopefully that's a little more clear than the gobbledygook I was just saying in the last slide. Okay, so right, there's our lymphatic duct. Okay, here it is in recap. So we've got our collecting lymphatic vessels, and we can think of these as being similar to blood vessels. You know, they're just sort of moving and transporting this fluid around, the lymph around. And we have our lymph nodes, which is where the lymph gets filtered. And then we have our lymphatic trunks, which is where kind of all those lymphatic vessels unite and drain large areas of the body. And we've got our right lymphatic duct, takes lymph from the right upper side, upper limb, the right side of your head, and your thorax to the heart. Thorax is your chest. And then you've also got your thoracic duct that basically takes lymph from everywhere else back to the heart. So you've just got these two major ducts that everything drains into. And you can kind of think of it as like a river system, you know, so you've got your lakes and ponds and the capillaries. Those are draining into little creeks, which are draining into rivers, which are finally draining into the ocean. Okay, so they are, their job is to return, you know, the excess fluid to the heart, but they're also able to recycle leaked proteins back to the blood. Anything that got out of the blood can get back there. They do carry pathogens and sometimes cancer cells to lymph nodes. And cancer is any type of cell that grows uncontrollably, and cancer can be liquid like in blood, or it can be solid like what we think of when we think of as a tumor. And either those solid cancer cells can break into smaller pieces and end up in the lymph, or it's part of the liquid tumor of blood type of cancer that goes to a lymph node. And if there's any pathogens in the body, they're going to make their way to the lymph node as well. And that's our body's way of being able to monitor and surveil what's happening in the fluids in our body. So they also absorb fat from the intestines. And so any of the lipids that we eat end up in those in the lymphatic system as well. And we're not going to spend much time talking about that part of the job of the lymphatic system. But again, I just wanted you to be aware that it happens. So what I do want to talk about now are lymphoid organs. And we're going to talk about some of the primary ones and some of the secondary ones. And what I mean by primary is basically they're making the immune cells that make up our immune system. And so their big job is to make lymphocytes. And lymphocytes is sort of our general term for all of the cells of the lymphatic and the immune system. And so most of those are made and they mature in the red bone marrow. And then some of them, particularly our memory cells, will mature in this organ called the thymus. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we have all these other secondary lymph organs. So we've got our lymph nodes, we have our spleen, we've got a bunch of stuff that's called MALT, mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Mucosa is the soft linings of your body. If you think about the inside of your mouth and nose, it's covered in a mucosa. So it's the inside of your digestive tract, and you'll see that there's lymphoid tissue kind of throughout. And so we're going to talk about three specific areas of MALT. We're going to talk about our tonsils, something called Peyer's patches, and the appendix. Okay, so red bone marrow produces all of our lymphocytes, which are also known as, or can also be known as white blood cells. And white blood cells are a type of lymphocyte. And they are mostly matured there and kind of released from the bone marrow when required. But some begin life in the bone marrow and then become fully formed in the other lymphatic tissues. So these could be the thymus, the spleen, or in some of the lymph nodes as well. So we'll say that 30 to 40% just 60 to 7% hang in the red bone marrow, 30 to 40% are kind of migrate to these other places, and that's where they mature and grow up until they're ready to be used. All right, let's take a look at one of those places. So one of those places, one of our other primary lymphoid organs is the thymus. And this is where lymphocytes called T cells mature and are activated in an immune response. And one of their they mostly have their big moment, their spotlight moment in early life. So our thymus is largest during infancy, as our body is really trying to detect all of the pathogens that we're exposed to in infancy. And then it gets smaller and smaller as we age. And so again, here's kind of a schematic of this. So we've got our bone marrow, and then it's going to send the different cells, T cells and B cells actually, to the thymus. And you can see as a young person, the thymus has kind of a lot of naive cells. And by naive, I mean like they haven't met a pathogen yet. And so that's why it's so big. And then over time, in an older person, the thymus kind of starts to shrink and atrophy a little bit. But mostly that's because it's holding on to these memory cells. And the memory cells have already been made. They're circulating in our body. And it doesn't necessarily need to hang on to them anymore. Okay, let's take a look at our secondary lymphoid organs just to track here. Just notice up in the left-hand corner, it'll tell you whether it's primary or secondary. We just talked about our two primary lymphoid organs. Let's talk about our secondary ones. Hey, here's your spleen. It's right here under your diaphragm. And the spleen is made up of red pulp and white pulp. And I know very, very creative names. They're anatomists who came up with it. But they have two different jobs. The red pulp sort of cleanses the blood. It removes like any aged or defective red blood cells. Remember, red blood cells carry oxygen around the body. Any like debris or foreign substances. And one thing to note, that iron from our red blood cells is recycled from those old red blood cells and then sent back to the bone marrow so that it can be reused in new red blood cells, which I think is pretty groovy. And then you've got our white pulp here in the center. And the white pulp is involved with immune surveillance again. So it's going to activate and proliferate our lymphocytes in the white pulp tissue if a threat is detected anywhere in the body's system. So if anywhere in these lymph nodes a threat is detected, it's going to send signals to the spleen to like release the kraken, right? Okay, so if we're going to keep going with our secondary lymphoid organs, we have to talk about the lymph nodes here for a moment. So we've got hundreds of these things. They're really tiny little organs. They're located all along our lymphatic vessels throughout the body. And their job is to filter lymph and again, activate the immune system if a pathogen is detected. So remember how we said there's that one-way system, everything's leading to the heart. So if all of that fluid is coming in to the lymph nodes, it's sort of scanning. If it does detect something, it's going to send out a system or send out an alert to the system. And it's going to send that to the heart, and that signal is then sent around the body to kind of mount a response. If you've ever had swollen glands or enlarged lymph nodes, what's happening there is like if a node can get kind of overwhelmed by a pathogen or just the process of creating immune cells, it can kind of get stopped up on its filtering duties. And then what we feel like in our necks is probably the place that you felt it, maybe under your armpits. But you might feel that inflammation or that swollen gland. And that's one of the things that your doctors will check you. That's why they kind of feel your neck when you go in for an exam, is that they're looking for signs of those enlarged lymph nodes, because that tells the doctor that there might be an infection. And that's particularly important in veterinary medicine because your patients can't talk. And so you're looking for these kind of outward signs of infection in animals that in a way that you're not with people. So lymph nodes are really important an important tool for veterinarians. All right, so let's talk about MALT, shall we? So this is our mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. And so it's not necessarily organized into an organ, but it's tissue that's found all throughout the body. So we've got mucous membranes in lots of different places. So inside your mouth and nose, inside the entire lining of your gut. And so that's what we're going to focus on for our lymphoid tissue. So it's going to have a couple of jobs. One is it's preventing pathogens from penetrating those mucous membranes. And again, another site of activating lymphocytes and proliferating them, making more. And so these are going to be our tonsils, the Peyer's patches, and our appendix. So our tonsils and adenoids are up here, Peyer's patches and appendix are down lower. We're going to go through each of those, and then we're going to wrap up this video. I appreciate it's getting really long now. Okay. So your tonsils are a ring of malt around the entrance of your pharynx, so the entrance of your throat. So it's going to gather and try to remove any pathogens from your food or any air before it can get to your GI tract or lungs. You've got several different types of tonsils. These are concentrations of that lymphoid tissue. And this is what your doctor may look for when they ask you to open your mouth and say, ah, stick out your tongue. They're looking for your tonsils. And this is what they might look like if they're inflamed. If you've ever had mono, which is a bacterial infection, or you've had strep throat, another bacterial infection, you'll end up with swollen glands, these swollen tonsils. And sometimes there might even be like little pockets of pus on top of them where your body's trying to fight the infection. All right, let's talk about Peyer's patches. So Peyer's patches are on the inside of your small intestine. So your small intestine is all in here. And then if we blow this up a little bit, you're going to see the inside of the small intestine. And now we're going to blow that up even more. And we can see all the little villi. Those guys are absorbing all the nutrients from the food that you eat. And within that lining, you have this lymphoid tissue in these little circles. They're called Peyer's patches. And their main job is to monitor all of that bacteria in your intestines. Remember, you've got good guys and sometimes bad guys can get in, and they try to prevent the growth of pathogenic bacteria. I found this electron microscope scan, and I thought it was a pretty cool picture. Just know it's not really colored that way. That's computer generated. But here's all the villi from your small intestine. And then there are those little hotbeds of lymphoid tissue that are embedded in the intestine to check for pathogens. Okay, our last one, the appendix. And a lot of us are surprised to find that our appendix actually has a function, because we do think of it as this sort of vestigial organ. But the truth is it actually contains a bunch of lymphoid tissue to prevent bacteria kind of from breaching the intestinal wall. And it also kind of generates memory lymphocytes for establishing sort of our long-term immunity in the gut. And so here's our appendix. And if we blow that up, and now we've taken a sausage slice of it, like I don't know if you've ever cut a pepperoni or a salami or something, and you cut these salami slices, and now we've laid it flat to look inside. This is the inside of the appendix, and then all along here we have these circular patches of lymphoid follicles of lymphoid tissue. So they're really similar to those Peyer's patches that we saw before, but they're extra concentrated in the appendix. There's kind of this interesting theory right now that that the appendix actually serves as a place, like a safe place, safe haven for our friendly gut bacteria during an infection. So if you've ever had a GI infection, gastrointestinal infection where you've had really bad diarrhea, the appendix apparently can house your friendly bacteria and then create like this biofilm that protects them from your body trying to get rid of the bad ones through the diarrhea. And then once the infection has passed, it will release them and allow them to repopulate the gut, which I think is pretty cool. All right, so this is your opportunity to sort of check in with yourself and see if you're able to answer or to do the things that are suggested here in our learning outcomes. If not, you may want to go back and check out those particular slides or rewind my video, which is now exorbitantly long, and my apologies for that. But one last thing I want to mention before I go is that in our class, one of the things that we're going to do is I'm going to ask you to create a summary sheet for each of the concepts that we do this term. And so you'll see this assignment pop up on Canvas here shortly, and your job is to create a summary sheet. And that summary sheet is going to cover the bullet points that are here. Whoa, I went the wrong way. But it's also going to be, I don't want this to feel like busy work for you. I really want this to be a helpful study guide. And there's two reasons. So we are going to have tests and quizzes in the class, probably not too many, but they are going to come up. But they're also a really great tool for you to refer back to, because the things that we're going to be learning about are going to build on each other. Third, I guess my third point is that it's also a great skill to develop before you head off to college, is being able to summarize these complex ideas. And so you want to make sure that your summary sheet addresses each of the learning outcomes. And so this will be the bullet point on the previous slide, or the beginning of kind of the homework calendar that I put up on the Canvas for this unit. You'll see those learning outcomes there. And then if you want some tips, you'll see this on Canvas. It's also linked in the homework calendar document. And it is a sort of overview of kind of how and why you might want to write a great summary sheet. And it's got kind of 10 steps that will help you. I'm a big fan of diagrams, Venn diagrams, concept map, flowcharts. Anytime you're taking information in your brain and you're inputting it into your brain, and your output is a different format, whether that's you drawing a picture or a flowchart or some kind of data visualization, you are making new synapses in your brain. That's a better way to remember than to just do something passive, like just look back at your notes as you're reviewing. So that's the other reason I'm asking you to do this. So anyway, there's a lot of good pro tips that are here. I think my expectation is that you'll spend maybe 30 to 60 minutes per week on each guide. It's really going to be your only homework for this class, is to work on these study guides and watch the videos, which will not be as long as this one is. I'm sorry I went on too long. But you're going to hand these in, and I'm going to grade them for accuracy, and they'll be worth 15 points each. My goal, or my my bargain with you, is that I will return them within one class day of hand-in, or you're going to get full credit for them. So again, these are not designed to be extra work for you. This is a tool that I really hope will help you learn how to study and to review material for this class and your other classes, so that you can continue to do really great work in college and beyond. All right, that is it from me. I'm sure you're tired of hearing from me by now. So thank you for your patience with me. Next video will not be quite as long, and I'll talk to you soon.